All right. Well, let's get rolling. So, hello everybody, and welcome to another Forge Fireside. My name is Brian Ellerman. I'm the founding executive director of Forge, which is finding opportunities and resources to grow entrepreneurs. We host this monthly fireside with entrepreneurs, founders, investors, people who are really moving and shaking in the startup and entrepreneurial world. With us today is Allie Burns, CEO of Village Capital and also a recent appointee of NACCE. We'll get into both of those things shortly. As a reminder, Forge is really focused on three key missions. The first is cultivating entrepreneurial mindset in all students. The second is doing the same in the communities where the university operates. And third is accelerating the scale and launch of promising startups. So, Allie, welcome once again, I should say. I believe you are our official first repeat on Forge Fireside. Well, and suitable person for it to be. I mean, your Tucson roots, we'll talk a little bit about the VilCap and the communities model and Abaca and some of the things that you and I started talking about, seems like forever ago now. So we last spoke in April of 2021. At that point in time, Forge was in the middle of our W21 accelerated entry program. So that was women-led startups, that cohort. And for those that don't know, our AEP program curriculum was built on Village Capital's community model. We still use Abaca's venture investment levels to evaluate Forge Ahead applicants and create a custom development plan. Bit of a question, but how have things changed at VilCap since then? And I'll give you one little, theme today, I think, is access to funding and scale. And so how have things changed at VilCap since April of 2021?
Yeah, in some ways that seems like a lifetime ago, and in other ways it seems like just yesterday. I sort of blinked and 2022 is almost over. So in some ways things have not necessarily changed, but just continued to accelerate, not to kind of borrow that term from the type of programming that we do, but continuing to see increase with the, sort of response to the pandemic and other related macroeconomic and macro political events, a lot of interest in the work that we are doing to support early stage impact driven entrepreneurs. So certainly seeing a lot of energy around climate change. More and more programmatic initiatives that we're running are really focused on sustainability of people and the planet, as well as continued interest in helping build solutions to help people build economic mobility. So certainly those are areas that haven't changed, but are growing in terms of the scope for us. On the sort of starting with the VilCap communities and ecosystem building work that we're doing, certainly a lot of continued interest and excitement in supporting locally led organizations who are building ecosystems and are on the ground with the entrepreneurs in places where VilCap doesn't have the capacity or expertise to work in those ecosystems, but we have access to the funders or to the networks or to the curriculum that we've developed over time. So that work is continuing to grow as well. On the capital side, one of the big things we're seeing is the shift in energy and attention, not necessarily away from venture capital. It's not that venture capital is bad per se, although we certainly see, if we look at just, the recent issues with FTX, the downsides of venture capital and the growth at all costs model, and the way that decisions are being made in VC as well in terms of who deserves capital. And so we're seeing a lot more interest in helping entrepreneurs identify their growth path and the capital that they need in order to sustain that growth path, and not pushing everyone towards that hyper growth or hyper scale model. Certainly that's great for certain subsets of companies, but what we're working to build is really more tools to help entrepreneurs better assess what is the growth path that I really want to follow? What is appropriate for the stage I'm in, for the market that I'm in, and what are the alternatives? Is it debt? Are there quasi equity structures, et cetera? And really understanding what's available, because so much of the media attention is on VC, but that's not the only solution for entrepreneurs to access finance.
And statistically, it's a minuscule percentage, right? That actually venture capital assists compared to
less than 2% or something like that. Yep.
But you're right. It grabs the headlines. That's what people want to talk about because, hey, it's sexy, it's exciting. Look at that. Someone picked up some, major round. And I don't mean to. I feel like I live in the glass house as an angel investor. But honestly, I spend a lot of time advising founders to take as long as humanly possible before accepting outside capital. To build it organically, build it with friends and family or whatever means you have. And now you've raised a number of things which we could probably spend an hour just on: micro lending, zero interest, some of the great work that's going on with, for example, we have what's called Community Investment Corporation here in Tucson. They do zero interest loans to BIPOC business people. Right. Those are the kinds of things that maybe they existed before and I just didn't know about them, but it just seems as if there's been a proliferation of new funding options out there. So one of the things I do want to get into today, and we're going to really tap your brain, and we'll call it it's the knowledge trust in terms of advice to those aspiring entrepreneurs and founders and business owners on where they can go for resources. Obviously, we have a heavy focus on Tucson and Southern Arizona, but I think you've been exposed to such a wealth of resources nationally, and many of those are starting to really pay attention to the community setting. So we will get to it. But I would think, if I recall, when we last spoke, you were talking about the resource initiative, I believe it was called.
Yep.
Any updates there?
Yeah. So resource, for those who aren't familiar, which might be everybody except for you, Brian, is a program that we created to help build capacity and increase access to both social and financial capital for locally led entrepreneur support organizations focused on and led by BIPOC communities, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as other underrepresented communities like women. So we have supported 23 organizations through 2 different, what we call accelerator for accelerator cohorts, providing them with capacity building, training on fundraising, training on business model, training on strategy, helping them essentially learn the lessons that we've learned over 12 years in a much shorter period of time. So they don't necessarily have to stumble through the same mistakes as maybe Village Capital has. And we partnered with an organization called the Black Innovation Alliance, which is an emerging organization that was created in 2020, actually, to specifically focus on what they call innovator support organizations, organizations that are specifically within the Black-led community, but they're very interested in sort of the broader sort of BIPOC support ecosystem as well. So we've been running this program with them for just about 2 years. We have these 23 organizations that have not only received access to this training, but we have also provided funding through this program. And it's all general operating funding. One of the things we know for entrepreneur support organizations, and Brian, I think you and I know this very well, is unrestricted funding is the best kind of funding because we have the ability to be strategic with that capital, and particularly for these organizations as they're in startup mode. So these organizations are now supporting incredible entrepreneurs within their communities, and they're able to have the resources that they need to provide programming, and in some cases actually start their own investment vehicles as well. There's an organization out of Oakland, California, that has already raised sort of double-digit $1 million vehicle, which has been a really exciting outcome of that program.
That's awesome. Yeah, not non-dilutive, as few strings attached as possible. I mean, that just frees the entrepreneur up to really build the business that they need to, as opposed to the one that Well, in fact, so in this very room, only a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we held the very first Native Forge conference. We had 35 total participants, 20 of whom were entrepreneurs from 4 tribes across Arizona: Quechan, Tohono O'odham, Pascua Yaqui, and the San Carlos Apache. And that was a big theme in the conversation. Was I've got this business concept. Somewhere on their way, they had some degree of success and they were trying to figure out, but how do I grow it? And the answer can't be, oh, well, just collateralize it with your house or just go out and ask your friends and family for the money. Like, I don't know any rich relatives. With Native Forge, it allows us to take our blend of education and mentoring and access to capital out to the indigenous entrepreneurs of the state. Could you talk a little bit about your recent appointment to NACCE, its aims, and how would you encourage Native Forge and its participants to connect?
Yeah, so NACCE stands for the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and it's a group of people that represent of investors, of ecosystem builders. I sort of consider myself a little bit of both, of folks who are in entrepreneurship-focused academia, folks who are, sort of former entrepreneurs or even current entrepreneurs building their business. And we're all private sector folks who are volunteering our time to support and advise the development of a national entrepreneurship strategy. This is I believe the 4th iteration of NACCE. The first iteration was in, I think, 2009, 2008, 2009. There were a couple of NACCEs prior to taking a break during a certain administration, and then has been restarted for the first time under the current presidential administration. We're housed within the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and I mentioned that very specifically because that's a resource within the Economic Development Administration. And we were created about 6 months ago in terms of the actual official first meeting. And really what we're focused on now is providing recommendations to the Assistant Secretary of Commerce, as well as the Secretary of Commerce, around a couple of key themes: access to capital, barriers to entrepreneurship, which are very similarly focused, talent development, talent and workforce development, the creation of regional technology hubs, and then sort of a bigger set of moonshot ideas. And the goal is to basically say, what role can policy play in reducing barriers for innovation and entrepreneurship, as well as accelerating innovation and entrepreneurship within the United States. So that's like high level what we're focused on. I should say, like, I'm not an official spokesperson for NACCE, but I am part of it. I'm not part of the government, all those good things. My views are my own, whatever we have on our Twitter bios. And on where can Native Forge entrepreneurs in general go to better understand what NACCE is doing, but also like what exists within the government today to help that they could tap into that they might not be aware of. And one is the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. They run a couple of significant grant-funded programs to support both entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial ecosystem builders, and the development of financing vehicles. They have a build to scale open RFP that they run every year, and that's really focused on the development of investment vehicles and regionally focused investment vehicles that would then provide access to capital. They have some initiatives that are specifically focused on entrepreneurs as well. So that's one place I would suggest for folks to go to just read up on the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship website about the different programs that are available. And we know that the federal government isn't necessarily an easy system to navigate and to know where to go. That's actually part of what we're thinking about as some of our recommendations, is how do we make it easier for people to get information. One of the barriers, I think, is that people just simply don't know that a number of these programs exist. There are also, particularly for the highly technical folks, there are things like the small business SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research Grants, the small business tech transfer grants, STTR, that are housed within different parts of the federal government that are available for, again, that non-dilutive funding available for companies to develop a proof of concept, to create sort of that first traction in order to demonstrate that they are investment ready. So those are just a few ideas of how folks could engage.
Yeah. Now, I will say, I have talked to a number of entrepreneurs who've been down the SBIR, STTR track, and they all invariably tell me it is incredibly cumbersome, lengthy, massive documentation required, et cetera. And so, not saying it's not great that we have these forms of funding, but if NACCE can offer one bit of feedback, could we simplify some of the application process for our entrepreneurs? Because they're supposed to be running a business, not filling out documentation. And if you want people to access the capital, you need to make it easy to apply for it.
Absolutely. That's definitely one of the things that we feel needs to be addressed. And I think there's probably also an interim opportunity to provide technical assistance, free technical assistance to these founders to navigate the system as well, so that they, if we can't sort of remove the bureaucracy completely in the short term, can we provide assistance so that they're spending their time running their business, not writing grant proposals, or like submitting 8 million documents.
Also, I will disclose for Native Forge, it is in fact supported by the EDA's University Center grant. So that is $500,000 with a equal match from us. Grant that we won this year, and in fact just received our funding starting in September to build this program out with the ostensibly with the 22 federally recognized tribes of Arizona. We shall see how far that reaches. Obviously, $100,000 a year for 5 years only goes so far, but it's a great start.
I just thought of another thing that might be helpful for folks, which isn't necessarily a direct engagement with the government, but the result of one of the other things that the EDA did recently, which is the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which was an effort to award regionally based sort of ecosystem organizations with funding to develop both entrepreneurship, tech, et cetera. And now those organization, a subset of folks have significant amounts of money, and then a larger group have some capital that they're working with, and likely in many cases are looking to connect with and support entrepreneurs through that. I'm sure you're quite familiar with
I'm going to have you host this show. I don't know why I'm doing this, because we were finalists on the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, and actually that's in my questions. We'll talk a little bit about the coalition that was formed and some thoughts there. But that was $500,000 for us to basically do sort of the technical assistance and development of our ultimate proposal, which we weren't selected for, but the coalition lives on, which is, I think, you have to look at it from the point of view that $500,000 built a really powerful coalition that now is energized. And in fact, just this week on Tuesday, we held the very first, we called it SACE, it's the Southern Arizona Economic Impact Summit, and brought in members of that coalition and others to talk about the various projects or programs that they've been involved in and what the economic impact was. It was an opportunity to actually share with people some of these success stories, and an invitation to the entrepreneurs in the community. Here are some of those leading resource providers and people that you can go and talk to. So it's absolutely true. A lot of this is helping seed these kinds of things. I'll come back to the coalition. I have to, the last time we talked, I put in a plug. I said, whatever you can do, Rise of the Rest, would love to see them come visit Tucson. Guess what? They just visited Phoenix again, and they didn't come to Tucson, Allie. I mean, Can you put in a word for us already, please?
I'll try again. Steve Case is the co-chair of the NACI. So certainly I will see him again in a couple of months. So I'll put in another plug. I know they did some return visits for the book, but the next Rise the Rest book, I expect that Tucson will be featured. So I'll put my best plug in.
I'll hold you to it. I don't know that I really can, but and to be totally fair, I know exactly why they were so quick. Was one of the investments that Revolution made, and full disclosure, I am a multi-time investor in Quick. I love them. I love Jamie Baxter. I think they're doing awesome work. I can't wait to see where they go. So I certainly could not begrudge them making the visit to Phoenix. Plus, I believe Michael Crow is also on NACI with you. Sure, and of course, he's the president of ASU. So yeah, you had two really good reasons for them to come visit. So yeah. I'm not bitter. I just want to be included. That's all. That's the way I look at it.
I agree.
So I was talking about that Southern Arizona, we call it SACAR, the Southern Arizona Coalition for Climate Adaptation and Resilience. I would imagine those are all words that you like to hear. The group encompasses government, education, economic development, industry, startups, and access to capital, or capital itself. The EDA took notice. I was at a conference in San Antonio with the EDA last month. They said, you guys in Southern Arizona, you're doing some things. So there's more than $2 million in EDA funding floating around right now between Build to Scale, University Center, the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, Sprint. All of these are EDA funded. So short of knowing someone like a Steve Case, how would you encourage communities like ours? Some have formal coalitions like we do. Some have just kind of loose coalition, loose group of team. How would you encourage them to get the attention of folks like the secretaries of commerce or the Steve Cases of the world, to not just to come visit, but to learn and to potentially invest, in the sense of making funding available to those communities that maybe are a little bit outside of the spotlight of what usually gets seen? Yeah.
Well, a couple of things I'll say, and with the caveat that I'm not in the weeds of the day-to-day, of course, of what's happening at the Department of Commerce or within EDA. Right. There are two things that have been recently passed. One is the CHIPS Act, which is focused primarily on sort of increasing our competitiveness by bringing more semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. Of course, it's like a pretty big risk for the country to have all of our semiconductor manufacturing essentially outsourced. But part of that is to the development of regional tech hubs. And so that is still, I think the details on that are still a little bit of a work in progress because the appropriate appropriations need to happen. But that's certainly one thing that I'm eyeballing, is like, how does that play out? The other is the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually included quite a bit of money focused on climate innovation, adaptation, climate change, climate tech. So those are two things that the NACI are looking at as it relates to our recommendations. And the reason I bring that up is one of the things that I think is really helpful is to focus on an area that is leveraging the unique attributes and strengths of a local or regional ecosystem. And certainly Southern Arizona has a lot of history and opportunity to be an innovator and leader in climate adaptation, innovation, and resilience. And certainly different parts of the country have different sectors, but also responsive to like the urgent needs of our time, which really are around climate and economic inequality. So certainly figuring out what's the differentiated approach that a particular region or ecosystem has, and really betting on that, and then doing exactly what y'all have done, which is create coalitions and find ways to leverage individuals within that coalition and their networks to ultimately get the word out to as many people as possible. And you eventually get to a Steve Case. Maybe it's via someone in your local ecosystem who is part of NACI, or I mean, there are dozens of other advisory councils that are operating within the federal government that maybe haven't gotten as much public glow as NACI has, but many of the other federal agencies have councils like NACI that folks in the private sector are involved in and might be connected with that you might not know.
Well, in fact, that was my follow-up question to you would be, are there others that we should be looking to invite? So, anybody, any groups or entities come to mind that you think we should be talking to?
Oh, dozens. Within it kind of, I mean, within this idea of sort of connecting with the federal government or sector specific, sort of
we can even go beyond, right? I mean, I think your travels and your role at VILCAP, not just NACI, but VILCAP, puts you in touch with ecosystems and communities all over the country. I mean, obviously they're the leaders like the Kauffman Foundations, but then there are others who I think aspire to have an influence in other communities that, I guess I'm sitting here to say, if anybody's looking for a next market, a next place to go to, sign us up. We're here for you. But so
few ideas off the top of my head. Folks in Kentucky and specifically in Louisville, if you aren't in touch with, there's an organization called Access Ventures, and there's sort of a incubator of a number of innovative financing vehicles, but they're also very, very involved in sort of the local ecosystem. They were also a Build Back Better, they're a coalition of folks were also Build Back Better finalists.
That I recognize the name. Yeah.
And so the folks in Louisville, whether that's Access Ventures or other folks within the coalition, but they're doing some really interesting things. A very close to VILCAP plug, although it's Access Ventures as well. Their founder was on our board previously. An alumni of Village Capital who is based out of Iowa City. And she had a company that was in the ed tech space. She had a successful exit during the pandemic. And now she and her husband are looking for ways to build the local ecosystem. So they're probably a little bit behind you, but are also in the what are the unique attributes of our local ecosystem, and really looking at circular agriculture, food innovation, and thinking about building sort of this regional food shed incubator. So they could learn from you, but I think also maybe hearing from folks that are earlier on their journey would be interesting as well. And certainly anyone on the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, I think would be a worthy guest. It's a pretty amazing list of folks.
Okay, great. I was on a podcast that aired yesterday about our Native Forge program for Autumn, the technology managers, university technology managers, and she asked me about like what kinds of lessons learned do you have to share, or how would you do you see this going to others? And I said, we don't know. I mean, we want to learn from others because, I don't presume that we've got it all right. And, you made a comment in your opening about making some mistakes. And of course, as we know, no, that's just entrepreneurial learning, right? It's just a part of, oh, that's a pivot. Oh, that's a pivot. Well, yeah. So I love the idea, whether they're farther along or they're earlier than we are. How are you approaching it, and what can we learn? So love that.
Yeah, awesome.
So we, as I had mentioned, the AEP, our Advanced Entrepreneur Program, we had put that on hiatus. Our last cohort was summer of last year. It was all students. So we went from women in the W21 to students in the summer, and then we put it on hiatus. We've greatly expanded our student venture pathways programs. I don't know if you remember, but on that Zoom that we did was Paul Valdez, who was still back home in Toledo. He hadn't even moved to Tucson yet. Paul's now moved here and is leading the Student Venture Pathways group. And that group that's focused on cultivating entrepreneurial mindset. We're even thinking about high school students, community college students, and of course, university students. How would you advise us to ensure the traditionally overlooked entrepreneurs have access to and participate in these?
Yeah, it's something that we had discussed at our last NACE meeting, and the groups that are focused on access to capital and barriers to entrepreneurship, because the reality is that barriers to entrepreneurship, if we really want to look at building a better economy, we need to build a more inclusive economy, one that doesn't look like the majority of people who are getting access to venture capital, for example. So that means that we need to really start at a systemic level. What's happening in the educational system? What's happening in the access to programming? So certainly, I think starting as early as possible. I mean, at VilCap, we're not focused necessarily on the educational side of the equation, and we're looking at the barriers for folks who typically are at least already sort of in undergrad, if not closer to post undergrad. But I do think that there's a critical need to work with organizations like the National Foundation on Teaching Entrepreneurship. I'm sure you're laughing. It's like, I'm just telling you all the things you already know, like the nifties of the
NFT.
world, but where are how do we one, there's already a lot of entrepreneurial energy in communities all around the country. It's not exclusive to people who are in privileged positions or privileged communities. So how do we tap into that energy and help folks early on see that there's a path for them in entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship in some ways? So like, you don't necessarily have to, if you want to think about entrepreneurship as a first path, you don't necessarily have to be able to leave your job or leave school and have, no access to a rich uncle who will, sort of pay you while you figure it all out. So examples, I mean, certainly getting the solve is on both sides. We got to get more entrepreneurs who look like the communities that we want to encourage more entrepreneurship from, and more access to entrepreneurship from. I think that's a better way of saying it, so that people see that that's a path for them as well. I mean, and folks like Serena Williams, to like put up an iconic person here, are starting to think about how to do that. But then also, how do we just provide space and time for folks to participate in these programs? So that's a really tough thing. And a lot of families that don't have access to privilege, like older siblings are taking care of younger siblings. Parents are not able to be around to necessarily help these students get to whatever programs that they want to participate in, et cetera. So, there's a pretty big set of systemic changes that need to happen. And there were parts of the CARES Act that didn't get passed. And I, kind of wish that they had, because they would have been addressing a lot of those issues that I actually think maybe wouldn't be fully clearly tied to entrepreneurship. But if we address some of the systemic challenges in our country, I think we can give access to more opportunities to have a path to entrepreneurship for younger folks as well.
Yeah, I call it the social safety net. You're asking someone to take a significant risk in starting a business. The least you can do is help cover a lot of the other aspects that life is going to throw at you, without asking them to also bear that. I know you're not necessarily, you're no more part of the EDA than you are a university, but are you, any university programs you want to give a shout out to that you've seen that are doing a really great job in this area?
Oh gosh, other than you all. I feel a bit biased.
Well, that's perfectly fine in my book.
I would say most of our interactions are with less with universities, because we're not necessarily seeing the tie to our work directly with a lot of universities. There's a lot of focus on tech transfer and sort of not necessarily full alignment with the sectors that we're operating in. So I just don't have as deep of knowledge in that area. So, but certainly, I mean, I think we from the outset of working with you knew that there was a lot of alignment, not just because I'm from Tucson, but a lot of alignment in how you all are thinking about supporting entrepreneurs and how we are thinking about supporting entrepreneurs. So within the ecosystems that we're supporting, there are certainly universities involved, but largely we're focused more on sort of the community-based ecosystems that are started usually by former entrepreneurs to solve a challenge that they faced as they were building their businesses, that not having access to both social and financial capital.
Welcome to Forge Fireside, where Brian asks you a whole bunch of questions about things that aren't really what you do, but
that's okay. That's okay.
But certainly, if there are some community programs that are really notable in terms of, especially for the underrepresented entrepreneurs and founders, if you've got resources or references that you want to send our way, we will be happy to post those and put those out there for others. We authored a white paper. Well, we're, sitting in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, and one of the common questions that came up is access to funding. And so we wrote a white paper that went from completely free all the way through venture capital and all points in between, largely for that idea. And we have that up and available on our site. And so we're always looking for other resources we can put out there for people who say, there's nothing for me. And like, no, there's a lot for you, but maybe we're not doing such a good job of helping share and make it available to people. So
yeah, I think how we increase access to information generally for folks who are just getting started, particularly who might not have the networks to connect them with these resources, is such a huge challenge. One thing I will throw out there is the set of 23 organizations that are operating throughout the country in the resource program. So I can send you the website.
Awesome.
For that program, but all of those organizations, if someone's within that particular ecosystem, and there's an organization called Div Inc. that's operating in a couple of different cities in Texas, and some are more highly localized. Like there's an organization called Macon Black Tech that's in Macon, Georgia, highly localized, but really awesome organization. So can definitely share that as a resource, no pun intended.
Plus here again, I mean, maybe they don't have aspirations of expanding from Macon to Tucson, but what can we learn from what they've done that we could, leverage in our own community and build our version of it? So
absolutely.
I'd love that. All right, we're getting to the last part of our conversation, and so now it's you're testing your ability as a prognosticator. If you had a crystal ball, what do you think it would show you about the evolving entrepreneurial landscape? For example, will new or recapitalized funds emerge to support those overlooked founders, new incubators, accelerators, new favorable policy? Is this the moment in time that federal funding truly turns the corner on supporting innovation and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I'll start with none of this is easy, but I'll start with the easier part, and sort of what does the future look like, particularly for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Look, I think we're seeing this across the tech industry, and it will have ripple effects. That I think it's going to be a bumpy time where even people who have plenty of money to provide will be scared, and when people are scared, they tend to fall back into old habits and patterns. So I think it's going to be up to those of us who have been loudly advocating for the system to change, and the way that entrepreneurs get access to capital, the way that decisions are made. We've got to continue to be the voices in the room to remind people it's a scary time, but actually there is so much data that shows that making an investment in a diverse team, making an investment in a problem in a company that's solving a real problem is a good investment, is a solid investment. It's not charity. although certainly philanthropic funds are welcome and needed in the space, but it's not charity. It's a good investment. And I think for a little bit, we're really just going to have to be loud about that. And if we're loud enough, I think that people will convince others, people who have been believers in this space of supporting entrepreneurs who are solving these really hard but real world problems that have a really important and solid market, and entrepreneurs who are coming from lived experience and diverse backgrounds and building diverse teams are the best investment that could be made. So I think it's going to be hard, but I'm also optimistic. We saw in the pandemic that people really did have a realization of what is needed. Now it's time for the money to follow the talk. And I think it will if the right players come along and then bring others along with them. I think we are going to continue to see capital going into the most needed solutions in climate. For example, I think investors were, especially early stage investors, were kind of scared off of climate tech sort of post early 2000s and have early to mid 2000s and are coming back to that space more aggressively and emphatically, knowing that there is a lot of need and capital coming into that space, including hopefully from the federal government, if the money can move from the legislation being passed to being released, certainly, and into solutions that address issues of economic mobility. So I think we'll continue to see energy and attention going into those spaces. Is this the moment where the federal government can actually, really back up and accelerate its ability to support entrepreneurs? I think the intention is absolutely there. And it's more a matter of, can the structure of the federal government get out of its own way? And what are the wins that can happen maybe without, we know that based on, the results of the midterms, that it might be a little bit hard to do anything on Capitol Hill, but that's not anything new. So like I said, I think the intent is there. It's really a matter of can the government get unstuck out of its own way?
Well, if history's shown us anything, it's a lagging indicator, right? In other words, we're acting out today things that were passed and empowered 2 years ago, and so okay, now we're staring at a divided Congress. Well, okay, then I guess 2025 is going to be tough. But what could we get going now? Maybe is the real critical question. And I'm certainly encouraged just seeing NACI take off, and the fact that we have a Secretary of Commerce and we have an EDA that are very interested in getting that input. That's encouraging for me. I spent most of my career on the FDA side of things, and I can tell you how difficult it was to get anything moving. Like 21st Century Cures was one of the most substantial things we ever did. And the teeth were completely ripped out of it because everybody got afraid. So I think about the funding side of this, the legislative and policy side of this, and it is going to be slow, but at least they've got industry and other folks helping to advise and encourage that direction.
Yeah, and a few big wins with the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act that will hopefully continue the momentum, and like the Build Back Better. I'm not part of any of the coalitions, so I don't know how painful it's been, but the money went out the door. So like that is pretty fast for the government. So I know it, obviously chatting with the folks at EDA, that was an incredible lift, but also, I think faster than what we've seen. So I'm very encouraged by that.
Yeah, I had a chance to chat with Craig Verstati, and I gave them all the credit in the world. They got $3 billion out of ARPA, and were told you need to have this out and gone inside of a year. And that's like a usual entire EDA kind of year, and it's all just under that one umbrella. So $1 billion under Build Back Better, Regional Challenge, plus the good jobs and all of that. So no, I think they deserve a lot of credit and recognition. Now it's how do the community, the ecosystem builders, what do we do with all of this, and how do we move that forward? So any closing thoughts on that one before we turn off the fire?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been encouraging, again, and sort of NACI, but also more broadly, is ecosystem builders. I think sometimes get a bit of a, I don't want to say a bad rap, but a bit overlooked. It's hard work, underpaid. Usually ecosystem builders are doing something because they saw something broken in their own experiences. And many of their organizations or their coalitions are startups themselves. And so how we help these organizations and how even the federal funding can help these organizations, particularly those who are working in and or led by underrepresented communities, how can we support them more and lift them up more? Yes, the entrepreneurs are the end of the sort of beneficiary line, so to speak. That's who we want to ultimately see be successful. But these ecosystem builders are playing a critical role, and I think sometimes definitely underappreciated. And so how do we make sure that they have the resources that they need in order to deliver for the entrepreneurs?
Well, I think they are all very fortunate to have champions like yourself out there and advocating for them and helping, drive hopefully the policymakers and the funding agencies and others to pay more attention, particularly to the underrepresented entrepreneurs that are out there working just as hard as everybody, but not necessarily getting the same amount of return. And we need to make sure we do something about that. So thank you so much, Allie, for your time and meeting with us today, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. Great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.